What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net. How's everybody doing with Mercury finally out of its retrograde? As we get into the second half of September, you're going to find that life feels like it's moving forward a bit because for the first time in a number of months, all the inner planets are direct, which means thoughts maybe get somewhere, actions maybe get somewhere. We move forward on things that became clear to us during Venus's retrograde over the summer. This week brings the equinox, which is when the sun moves into the sign of Libra. It's the halfway point between the solstice in June and the solstice in December. It marks fall in the northern hemisphere, which we are starting to experience in a glorious way as I am recording this, and spring in the southern hemisphere. And so the energies of this week, which have a lot of adjustment aspects in them, are going to be bubbling in the background for the next 3 months as we go through the season. The other thing to know about the rest of September is that we have an Aries full moon on the 29th at the end of the month. And after that, next month, we will be having eclipses in Libra and in Taurus, both ruled by Venus. So again, all of the information and self-validation and reclaiming bits of yourself that you did this summer are going to apply directly into what happens in October. For more about all of this, you'll find my forecasts at ohmtimes.com, which has my monthly and new moon and full moon forecasts, and of course at my site, empowermentunlimited.net, which also has a sassy weekly podcast for your enjoyment as well. And now we're going to talk about all kinds of things related to astrology. My guest today is Armand Diaz, a consulting astrologer based in Long Island, New York, with an international clientele. He's the author, producer of 3 books, including Separating Aspects, The Astrology of Breakups, Divorce, and Other Partings, and Integral Astrology, Understanding the Ancient Discipline in the Contemporary World. And he is a frequent contributor to astrological publications. Armand is the past president of NCGR, the Astrological Association, and he can be reached via his website, armanddiaz.com. Welcome, Armand.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kathy. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so glad. Well, I'd like to start with the question I like to start with all of my guests. What's your astrology origin story? How did you come to astrology, or how did it find you?
Oh, boy. Well, okay, it's only an hour show. We'll see what we can do here.
Go for it.
It's important to understand that I was always interested in astrology. I have, since a pretty early age, practiced divination in various forms. I was all in favor of learning astrology in the 1980s when I was in my 20s, but I had to do charts by hand. And although I can do them now, I actually teach how to do that now. I wasn't going to do that then, so I stayed with the I Ching and tarot and so on for a while. And then in 1997, early in the year, I started having these really, really powerful dreams. It was obvious that there was a lot of content in here that it was important. And I would be in those like big libraries looking through books of symbols, and they were clearly, astrological, alchemical kind of symbols. So I started to read about astrology to sort of figure out what the meaning of the dreams was, which apparently the meaning of the dreams was I should learn astrology. Apparently, that's what they were going for with that. It wasn't. There were a few other things I might have got out of it, but yeah, that was how I got into astrology. And I learned I was having, for those who speak astrology, I was having at the time transits of Uranus opposite my sun, Neptune opposite my moon, and then Pluto trine my Mercury. And I downloaded astrology. I mean, I learned 90% of what I know, in terms of astrological knowledge in just a couple of years.
I have a friend who took Debbie Campton Smith's Notes from a Stargazer's, Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook, I think it's what it's called. Took it to Acapulco for the weekend and came back completely conversant, like opened up a portal to something he had known in an earlier life. So I am not surprised by your story. And obviously you took it and ran with it. But I'm curious. So you mentioned other forms of divination when you were young. So how does astrology fit in with other systems or studies that you've been involved with through your life?
Well, I mean, at this point in time, I just look at it as it's really all divination. We have different roots in astrology. Astrology is a little bit of a separate kind of thing, admittedly, because of the way it works. There's not that element of randomness in what you're reading, right? As opposed to tarot cards or something like that, where the spread should be random. With astrology, it's like what the spread is going to be. What the chart is going to be. But other than that, I mean, it really is all the same thing. In my opinion, it is all divination, really.
Different paths to the same truth or information.
Yeah. I think that there's a real difference in terms of the let's say, for example, astrology is great with timing. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to work on a time frame. There's nothing that beats it. But then tarot can give you some interesting details that are kind of hard to pull out with astrology. And then the I Ching gives you an overview and advice, but not necessarily. Sometimes there's specific information there too. So there's a difference to them all, but they're all divination.
So how did you come up with the concept of integral astrology? How did you develop it, and what is it?
Well, let's think about it this way. There's a lot of astrologies out there, right? You could practice sort of, let's just call it modern Western astrology, but you could sort of do a subset of that and do psychological astrology or evolutionary astrology. There's Uranian astrology. There's a lot of traditional astrologers. Right? So there's a lot of different techniques, and I'm only scratching the surface with those few. And Vedic astrology and Chinese astrology. So there's a lot of astrologies out there. And so when I was studying astrology in the 90s, kind of the attitude that was around seemed to be sort of like, live and let live. I mean, the Uranian astrologers can do their thing, I'm doing my thing. It didn't seem to be much in the way of conflict. In part because there wasn't that much communication. You had conferences and meetings and stuff like that, but you didn't have the internet giving you tons of information. And then around 2000, the resurgence of traditional astrology seemed to be accompanied by a kind of, well, what's the real astrology? What's the right astrology? And the answer that I have is that the astrology that you use is a reflection of cultural factors, personal factors, and there isn't a right astrology. Rather, there is astrology that fit into different contexts.
That makes sense.
So, for example, if a client comes to me and is, so I'm searching for my life path in career or something like that, well, then, more psychological evolutionary techniques. But if somebody say, hey, look, I'm looking to sell my house, what would be a good time for that? Well, I might look more like towards traditional astrology.
Mm-hmm.
So
you have a huge bag of tricks.
Yeah, I have a pretty big bag of tricks, it's true.
Got it. And so the book you wrote about that expounds on this?
Yeah, well, it specifically puts it into context of where do the different schools of astrology fit in, and the whole integral concept, which is something that it's associated quite a bit with Ken Wilber, but there's a number of different psychologists and folks that have contributed to the ideas. And, it's about the sort of evolutionary path of consciousness, of human consciousness. And then so what I did was matched their different sort of stages and areas with the different astrologies. So that, for example, the question of fate or something like that, how does something like that fit in? Well, it depends how much fate there is and how much free will there is not a factor of, some sort of cosmic conditions like how much oxygen and nitrogen is in the atmosphere. It's a reflection of the individual consciousness and its development. So if you're sure that your life is planned out for you and there's no real options but to follow through, then it's probably true. But if you're more of a modern kind of approach to things and you think you have choices, and then that's true too.
So your perspective has a big influence on how you would experience your chart and the transits.
Yeah,
sounds like
most definitely. Yeah. Most definitely.
Okay. So your belief system is a big factor in all of this. Okay. And is that something that you uncover pretty quickly when you're meeting a client for the first time? You get an idea of where that person falls in this?
Well, if clients come in with tells that let you know where they are with things. So I look there's 3 questions that get asked in one form or another. Right. And the question that comes from people who are taking a more fatalistic approach is, what's going to happen?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And for folks that are more let's say, on the modern kind of path of things, the folks that would be in business and so on, things like that, the question is usually, what can I do? It's not what's going to happen. You give me the weather forecast and I'll figure out if I'm taking the umbrella or not.
Right.
It's that kind of thing. And then a little bit further on, there are some folks who say, what does this mean? What does all this mean? Why is this happening? What am I here to learn? What are the lessons of this? And so those 3 questions, which get asked in myriad forms, sort of show not where the person's consciousness is. It just lets us know where the person's consciousness is about what they're asking for, what they're looking at.
Right, and that would then guide how you present the information and proceed with your session, it seems to me.
Right. I mean, I always try to, if somebody says what's going to happen, I always try to say that they have a choice in the matter. And I recall one client, she was a professional, she had a master's degree, and she just kept asking what was going to happen with her relationship. And I said, but come on, you know that you have choice and free will. You know that you have a big factor. Your own intentions are a big factor. And she says, I know all that, but I still think you can tell me what's going to happen.
Uh-huh. I've had this client in a different body. Yeah. Oh, boy. Okay. Well, what kind of got my attention, I saw your shifting gears slightly here. I saw a video you did about books, like books that might be useful for people to get an idea about what's going on in astrology, or just it just seemed like a nice little library moment. And somehow where I went from that is thinking about a topic of almost obsession with me, which is the pervasive information online that is sometimes real astrology and often the Hallmark version of it. And so I'm just noticing that there's a rise of awareness of astrology because of social media, because of the internet, and the whole approach, the acceptance level is so different from when I started. We were interested in it at about the same time, but my studies predate yours by about a decade. And I'm just curious if this has caught your attention, what you see. Well, what was it like? Let's just, for those of you out there who are young and don't know about this, what was it like before the internet? How did astrological information get passed around in your memory here?
There was a time before the internet. It's. I used to wonder about people who were around before television. It's like, well, they seem to have adapted so quickly to it. And the same thing with the internet. I mean, it hasn't really been that long, and it just seems like it was always there, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
So in the day, there, you'd probably find a teacher someplace if you could, depending where. I mean, because I'm not far from New York City, there was an abundance, and I quickly found teachers, but a lot of it came through books. For folks, and then there were the conferences and workshops and things like that. So it was a much slower pace, and it was typically a little bit more methodical than things are with the internet. Because the internet, it's okay, wow. So the asteroid Juno is about partnership and commitment, and that's, you could learn all that, and you could spend days learning about that without really knowing much about, let's say, Venus or the moon.
Right.
So, so it was a little bit more organized. It was a little slower. You went in a stepwise kind of fashion, as opposed to sort of going to the smorgasbord and just taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I can say that as past president, well, not really past president, it was a former president of NCGR. That this is something that astrological organizations are kind of gritting their teeth about, the fact that lots of folks wind up billing themselves as astrologers with not a lot of, you don't need formal training and certificates. I have one, but you don't need that or anything like that. But a little bit of time and effort that goes into it is not a bad thing. So yeah.
I actually wrote a screed about that on the Best American Psychics blog, but online astrology hacks for things to look at when you're a consumer of astrological information. And I will confess, there's some stuff that goes on out there that just rubs me absolutely the wrong way, completely. But my memory of the early days is that usually a store could be an entry point. I came to this in Houston, and I found information and things at a really unusual store called the Aquarian Age Bookshelf. There was also a store called Body, Mind, and Soul, which is still around. NCGR, the local NCGR chapter, would have its meetings there. I had a lot to do with that store when I lived in Houston. And you'd find out, like, be a flyer somewhere, and you'd find out about a course or a talk, and you would go to it. And I recall early in my studies, an entire course on Saturn. And I will never forget that, because it just locked it in really, really, really well. And what's happening now really fits the short attention span theater that life has turned into, seems to me.
Well, and it is true. I mean, we could lament it with astrology, but it's really very much the case with just about everything. The idea that we're we're taking everything light version, and so. Boy, yeah, but the New Age bookstore that you would find or something like that, that was terrific, right? And there's not that many of them left, nor are there the New Age publications that you used to find in them. But yeah, that was something. And the days when it seemed like a reasonable business practice to stick your business card up on the cork board in the coffee shop.
Right, right. Well, I just encourage people to pay attention because there's stuff that now gets like the mind, the hive mind latches onto a concept. So like Mercury retrograde is this, sky's falling, and everyone has this crazy stuff they're saying. And some people are saying very rational and helpful things. But that's why I call it the hallmark effect, because something grabs it and starts commercializing it, and people run with it without entirely knowing what it is, and they distill it into a sound bite or something that sounds really cool. Um, I always encourage people to pay attention. Does this ring right? Maybe you want to learn more about this and not be so fixated on one thing. I mean, this summer especially, I don't know if you had people coming at you with everything is retrograde. Oh my God, this is horrible. Like, this is not an aberration. We have lived through this recently.
Yeah. Well, Mercury retrograde is pretty prominent, and you do see the Mercury retrograde effect. Venus retrograde and Mars retrograde, the inner planets, you really do get some pretty telling signs of that. But then, people extrapolate to that, say, well, but Uranus is retrograde. Well, yeah, Uranus is retrograde most of the time. Not most of the time.
Right.
It's retrograde about 45% of the time. It's not really such a big deal. The stations are a big deal when it stops and changes direction. But the actual retrograde itself isn't so much. But then you get this kind of like, yes, people will worry about it. But but that's the same thing as like people do with medical information or anything else, right? I mean, it's just you know a little bit, and you think you know a lot.
To be fair here, there are some benefits, though, that have come from so much of life moving online. You can certainly have access to teachers who may not have been coming through your area. You can take classes with groups of people. Do you find, what's your experience of that been? Because it seems to me, I mean, I'm sure with your involvement with NCGR, you became acquainted with a whole lot of people, but there's something about online communities and online teaching that has a very Aquarian, let's link greater communities together effect to it.
Oh yeah, that is certainly the case. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for going back to the old days. We get a lot. I personally get a lot of benefit out of the internet. Most of my clients, my bio there, located on Long Island with an international clientele. That really is the case. I don't see very many people locally at all. I have Saturn in the third house. I don't necessarily thrive in my local environment. So I think that it is a good thing. I think that it is a really good thing. I mean, my YouTube channel, my Integral Astrology Facebook page. I mean, these are great sources for me of clients, and also the ability to get information out there, to be able to share my information and my perspective on things, as is also to your show, right? These are all positives that work for us and work for everyone. And yeah, I mean, there's nobody vetting it, but that's okay. You got to figure that sooner or later, probably, quite possibly, maybe, the stuff that isn't that good will not stay around that long, and the stuff that has a little bit more substance to it will endure.
And this method of distribution certainly beats typing up a newsletter and leaving it places and putting it in the mail to maybe 75 people and hoping that something comes from it. You can certainly have a much greater reach. Yeah. Oh no, I'm not advocating going back at all.
I'm gonna point out one thing though, because in the day when I started, and this, when I started really like about 20 years ago, putting myself out there as an astrologer, you'd have the little ad that you took, the quarter page or eighth of a page in a New Age publication or something like that, and you had to pay for it and all that, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But it was kind of easy. And now we have social media, and it's essentially free. But boy, oh boy, it takes a lot of work. You spend a lot of time, providing the content that is sort of your little. Otherwise, it's like your business card to the world. Let's say.
And it does take a lot of time. So we're paying with our time and energy. And all you consumers out there who get our forecasts or see our videos or listen to the show, this is what we do for marketing, and it does take a terrific amount of time. So then when people will come and then say, I got this piece of information and I want you to comment on it and you owe me an explanation for this. And you kind of go, do I? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically the
Yeah.
Jupiter retrograde. For whatever reason, that one this year got such hype. There's the word I've been looking for. It got such hype that there were like demanding posts. Explain this. What does this mean? What does this mean for individuals? Like, what if I don't want to talk about this?
Yeah, well, no, now you're obligated. I enjoy putting out the content, and I do think it's helpful for people. That's a good thing. And I mean, I'm not. It's not solely advertising or anything like that, but there is that aspect to it. And yeah, a lot of times on my YouTube videos, I get these comments of like, well, I'm a Virgo with a Sagittarius rising, and well, I'm not really going to answer that in the comment section in any great depth.
How about book a session? And with that, we're going to take our first break. Please hang in, everybody. We'll be back really soon. Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. This is Kathy Beal, and our guest today is Armand Diaz, and we're just kind of free-floating about astrological practice. Right before the break, we were talking about the difference between how astrology fit into the world when we were first learning and practicing it, and the current state of so much of it being online. And it occurs to me that the smorgasbord aspect of so much information being online has an upside to it, because people can get exposure to all of those different types of astrological schools and methods that maybe before you wouldn't have stumbled on when you were, decades ago, when we were just going to New Age bookstores and health food stores and finding flyers and stuff. What do you think of that?
Definitely. There's things that will show up sometimes that I'm not familiar with, because there are a lot of different types of astrology out there, and a great deal of the help of the internet is being able to look it up. I mean, oh gosh, just think about all the different asteroids. I don't mean even just the 4 goddess asteroids. I mean,
right?
There's like 12,000 of them out there, something like that. So you can do your own exploration of what these things mean and how they work, and that's terrific. Yeah. No, there's a lot of good stuff about the internet. I mean, I'm not suggesting otherwise, but it's just when it comes to learning astrology, a little bit more structured. But that, as I said, I had Saturn in the 3rd house, so that's what I'm always thinking about.
Yeah, well, I have Saturn in the 9th house, so it's a big deal to me too. and coming out of Mercury retrograde in Virgo and a Virgo new moon, it's an excellent time to instill concepts of discernment and evaluative thinking in how you approach these things. all you listeners. All right, off my soapbox. Um, so, any other observations you care to make about what's going on in the world of astrology right now?
Well, it is clearly as popular now as it has ever been. There's always waves of popularities in the 60s and 70s, really going into the 80s. I actually think it's waves, but the waves have always been building, I think. But it really is at a kind of, I'm not even going to say it's a peak, but it really is at a very high level now.
There's a lot of
And I
fascinating
think that that's a
mainstream
great thing.
branding. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, again, there's a
Yeah.
lot of mainstream branding going on. There is funny you say Waze because there is a navigational system for your car called Waze that this summer released voices in the different signs. And I can listen
Oh,
to each
wow.
of them only once because after a while it repeats too much. I mean, Aquarius is things like rules are a construct, but Saturn wants you to turn right here, sort of thing. Um, Aries is let's get going kind of energy. But I've also noticed it. Seems to me there was a really unusual place it cropped up. Anyway, really mainstream business stuff like brands deciding they want to show what the different signs would do with their products. Maybe it's just the trend of the moment. Maybe it's something that's going to be ingrained more and more. I keep thinking of the movie Network, which probably hardly anybody remembers. And as that's the I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore reporter. But TV news gets so crazy that it starts with a carousel of insane and outrageous figures, and one of them is an astrologer. So
Mm.
there's kind of that vibe going on with some of this. Anyway, I don't know. It's fun, but it crops
There's
up
a
in the
lot
most
of pushback, right? There's a
really.
lot of pushback to astrology. See, the thing is, it's not really that well understood. Right? So, in our Western materialist, scientific kind of culture, astrology I mean, it has to be looked at as being nonsense. So it gets, put in with all the other nonsense. And so that's a big part of the pushback. And a lot of folks, in the scientific academic community are really disturbed by the popularity of astrology. They see this as being a really bad thing. And there's a lot of pushback. And of course, in the media, even when they try to be helpful, and sometimes they do. I've seen astrologers and talk about astrology in a positive light. Of course, everything has to be sort of put into like as you said, a sound bite. Everything has to be put into easily digestible form in a very short amount of time. And so even the positive stuff isn't that good. It's not really very complimentary to astrology. So, but it is. I think it's Neptune and Pisces. Neptune and Pisces is just saying, like, let's open up to this.
Oh, that's interesting. I had not made that connection. Huh. Well,
But
and that
last
actually,
time Neptune,
yeah, I'm sorry.
sorry, the last time Neptune was in Pisces was the whole spiritualist movement,
You're
right,
right.
that started in upstate New York. That was the last time Neptune was in Pisces, and that became a big thing. And it sort of it waned, obviously, but it morphed into other things. As we went forward, there was the whole Golden Dawn and those types of things, and eventually the '60s and New Age and so on. So yeah, it's an opening for sure.
I'm going to rethink many things as a consequence of that. Uh, Fascinating. Well, that actually leads into a big topic, and that is any thoughts on the current outer planet activity and what that bodes? Seems to me right now we have all the outer planets in at least in signs that are cooperative with each other. But that's about to go into a big change in 2025. Any Anything at all you care to elaborate on with this?
Well, we do have Pluto, Neptune, and soon enough Uranus at the end of their respective signs, right? And what we're going to get is the results, let's say, of their passage through the sign. Usually, when an outer planet enters the sign, we get this kind of, this is what we're talking about. This is what's on the agenda for the next 7, 14, 20 something years. And so, like, when Pluto went into Aquarius this spring for a while, right away, AI became this huge topic, which it wasn't a year ago. It wasn't at the beginning of this year. And unions became,
Right.
we haven't had, certainly in the United States, we haven't had this kind of union activity. So we get that announcement of what things are going to be about. It's a big mistake to think that is going to be what things are going to be like at the end of the sign. The transformational process is taking us in directions that we haven't created yet, and so we certainly don't know what they are. But when we get the planets at the end of the signs, then we start to see. So let's say Uranus at the end of Taurus has a lot to do with our basic resources. It has a lot to do with the financial situation, the financial community, like financial institutions, and things like that. Neptune at the end of Pisces is certainly opening us up more towards spiritual and metaphysical things. And we're starting to see what has happened over the course of the last 7 or 14 years. And then Neptune goes into Aries, and that is perhaps a little bit more concerning than Uranus will eventually go into Gemini, and that's very much technology oriented. Every time Uranus is in Gemini, we get these big technological, mostly improvements, innovations for sure. Pluto in Aquarius is, we have to watch out for mass rule. This is the dark side of Aquarius. There's potentially freedom, but also the potential for the sort of tyranny of the majority. And Neptune in Aries is the one that has me, I think, most concerned, because Neptune takes us beyond the boundaries. It dissolves the boundaries. And Aries is a sign of war. Let's be honest here. It is the sign of war and conflict. And, it might be really great for sporting teams and things like that, too. But Neptune in Aries is a little bit disconcerting, because Neptune shows what we are as a collective fascinated with. When Neptune was in Aquarius, we were fascinated with the internet and technology. When Neptune is in Pisces, we're fascinated with spirituality and astrology. And Neptune goes into Aries. What are we going to be fascinated with?
Well, here's a question. So Neptune will be in Aries, Pluto will be in Aquarius, and soon enough, Uranus will be in Gemini. Couldn't this be information as the battleground?
Could be. I like that. I like the way that sounds. I like the way it sounds, because it sounds better. An informational battleground is better than another battleground. But yeah, and the thing is, who is controlling it? Who is controlling it, and what are they doing in order to maintain that control? You remember, the outer planets, when they're in a sign, don't play on one team or another according to our way of looking at things. Pluto goes into Aquarius. It's not like, okay, well, now these more Aquarian ideals or organizations or whatever are going to be. Pluto will play both sides. He's just ramping up the arguments on both sides. And the same with Uranus. Uranus is always the duality, right? Uranus is always about duality. And so it's really kind of an open question. And I've learned to say that it's not any less concerning when we come up, because what would happen? What would happen if, let's say, for example, the control of information sort of dripped down to things like radio, right? You know, it's not necessarily any less benign. Who's controlling the information and how they're doing it? I mean, well, China already provides a wonderful example, or a horrible example, I should say, but it already provides an example of what the control of information can look like, and as the battleground. There's things to be concerned with, and I'm not a very, I don't have a very pessimistic view of things or anything like that, but I look around and I say, how are we meeting the challenges that we have already that we already have to deal with, and how would we handle something new? Well.
Oh, and looking back in history, it behooves people to remember that the last time Pluto moved into Aquarius in the late 1700s in France, there was actually tyranny by the citizenry for a period of time.
Yeah. Well, the French Revolution, that's a scary one.
It's a very scary one, but it doesn't necessarily mean it happens again this time this way. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, is this when the Cylons show up and we find out that is this when there's a hybrid of humans and robotic intelligence? Cylons is a Battlestar Galactica reference, to those of you who don't know what I'm talking about here.
Wow. You're going back in the vault there, Battlestar Galactica. Wow. Lorne Greene, right?
Oh, no, actually, well, yeah, but I'm really the second round, much like I'm a Star Trek The Next Generation person. But yes, you're right. Yeah, that's Lorne Greene. That's way back there. Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's important to recognize that we'll see the same kinds of themes, because those are Pluto and Aquarius themes. But hopefully we have collectively, and enough of us individually, we have learned enough not to repeat the same kinds of things. And typically that seems to be the case. The Uranus-Pluto square of the teens, the 20 teens, and just not that long ago, folks were looking at that and they were looking for comparison either to the 60s when the Uranus and Pluto were conjunct, or to the prior square in the 1930s. And there are definitely resonances with the what happened in the 1930s, but quite different and dealt with quite differently. So you could be optimistic about all this. Yeah, you could be. And the future's not written. We write it. The problem is, it's the stars give us the materials to cook dinner, and it's up to us. It's up to us to decide what we want to cook and how we want to do it. Hopefully people will do well with it. A look at the status of the collective now is not particularly encouraging to me, but you never know what's around the corner.
What do you think? I find it interesting, and this can't be a coincidence, that we're going through eclipses in Aries Libra with the North Node in Aries as the build-up to Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries.
Yeah, that's true. The North Node in Aries is giving us a taste, as it were, of what we'll be dealing with as we get the planets in there. Hopefully showing us the better part of it. Always showing the better part. It is the North Node, after all. So the innovation, in Aries, the ability to move forward with things, it's encouraging us to act. I have to look at the astrology and not consider the situation as we may see it. But the South Node in Libra is about it on like a collective level. It's about a little too much debate. It's a little bit too much taking every single perspective into account. And the North Node in Aries is saying, well, sometimes you have to make a decision and do something, and that's not a bad idea as long as what you're doing isn't stupid. and there's the tricky part.
It seems to
But
me
Neptune will do
hmm
both.
Oh, Neptune will do anything.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it seems to me that we're in like a training ground. It's like a boot camp to get our self-reliance and self-actualization muscles really going so that we're more used to doing things from our own impulses without sitting around and playing little manipulative, let's move the chessboard around so we can kind of trick the other person into doing what we want or to guess what they want, which is do things.
Well, the need for, I mean, as a North Node in Aries and the better side of what we can get out of any of the transits of Aries, I agree entirely. It is very much about, you got to do your thing. Aries is a sign that if you know Aries, they can go their own way. They'll do their own thing. If it's not right, for them, they're not that interested. It's not you have to always participate in everything. They could be kind of hermits when they need to.
Hmm.
And the self control that can go with Aries as well, the ability to focus on something and go with it. Those are all really positive things. And I would on a more like interpersonal level, indeed, the South Node in Libra, the North Node in Aries is saying, well, yeah, be nice to everybody and take into account what others have to say, but you got to do your own thing. You can't worry about what others are saying. You can't always wait for everybody else to come along with you. You kind of got to go do your stuff.
Absolutely. I keep seeing a bumper sticker I've had for decades with Bart Simpson on his skateboard saying, out of my way. Just going ahead.
Exactly.
Hmm. Uh, Chinese curse times, huh? We live in fascinating times. Something you said earlier reminded me of a Sidney Omar quote that I ran across early in my astrological readings, which is, the stars impel, they do not compel, which underscores
Yeah,
the
that's
concept.
that's a that's a good one.
That's a good one. And of course, the concept of choice, because, people can hear these statements about what's coming, and a certain personality type can just decide that they're going to lie on the floor in a fetal position or develop anxiety attacks years in advance, whereas other people would go, okay, challenge accepted. And one thing I keep coming back to is the activity towards the end of Capricorn that we've been undergoing in the last few years has made it necessary to strip your life down and to simplify and streamline and rewrite your own list of priorities, and like instead of having 12 things that are really important to you, maybe 3. And now it's okay, implement, act on. You've got this knowledge, you've got this base, and go for it.
Very North Node in Aries, and I think the stripping down and paring down, which we were forced to do, was ultimately very productive. I think that was ultimately very good. We were a little scattered with our energies, and it's better to be more focused on what really matters. And yes, now it's let's act on that. So,
Mm.
hey, so you want to hear my quote in sort of like answer
Please,
to Sidney Omar?
please.
Sidney Omar, boy, I thought Lauren Green was a distant reference. Sidney Omar. But my thing on prediction is that prediction is the art of reading signs of a future we have not yet created.
Oh, that's lovely.
Wow.
That's
Yeah,
lovely.
think about that all day. Think
And that
about
is
that all
yours.
day. Reading signs.
Yeah.
Yes, me.
Well, good.
Me.
I will
I do
quote
that.
you. Ah,
This
see,
is my first public exhibition of it, though.
I'm
Exposition of it.
everyone. We are honored to have heard it. Always
Of course you
credit.
are.
Always. Here we go. Always credit the source. Do I hear any Leo happening in this call here? Anyway,
A little bit.
just a little bit. So we're kind of winding down. Are there any last thoughts, observations, concepts, non sequiturs you care to impart before we say goodbye?
I just want to reinforce what you said. When I do my forecasts, I always, now I really lean heavy into the positives, and if there's some little caveats and worries, unlike my little speech today about Neptune and Aries. But other than that, I tend to be very much. I really make sure that I don't say anything negative. And ironically, I'll post these things and people will comment like, "Well, I'm just going to stay under the bed today," or "This week I'm not going to do anything." Well, I didn't tell you to do that. I think it's really important that we, go out there, like, live our lives the best we can, try to figure it out. Look, here we are. We're recording this right when a day Mercury stations on a new moon. It would. We should have consulted an astrologer for this. But
hey, the technology worked. Yeah, right.
We'll see if it airs and it was recorded and all that. But yeah, we have to do our best. It's a weather forecast.
It's absolutely the framework that I put it in myself. So I'm in agreement. Yay. This has been a delight. Would you tell people all the places they can find you online? Because there are many.
There are. My website, ArmandDiaz.com, is a good starting point. On Facebook, Integral Astrology is the name of the Facebook page, and if you just search for that, you should see that. My YouTube channel is also called Integral Astrology. If you search for my name there, and I am actually morphing over to the Evolve Plus network. It is Psychic John Edward has put together. Let's call it Facebook for spiritual folks, and I'm posting a lot on there, and I find it to be a really wonderful community that I would invite everyone to join.
Evolved Plus.
Yes, I think if you search Evolve Plus TV, it's something like evolveplus.tv is the website, I believe. But if you just if you search for it, you might have to search for it.
Oh.
You'll find it.
Okay. And on your YouTube channel, I had mentioned that you have. I'd seen a video with discussions of books that you found particularly interesting or helpful. What other sorts of things could people find there?
Well, you'll get weekly forecasts and monthly forecasts, which I usually do live and then sort of save them. And then you'll find things like understanding eclipses and Mercury retrograde and understanding Venus retrograde, all the stuff like that. Just general. You can go. There's some evergreen things that are there. They'll always be relevant, and then there's some that are more relevant to specific time frames. For example, I did a one on the nodes on the Aries Libra axis, or like when a planet, one of the outer planets ingresses, like when Pluto came into Aquarius. I do those things. Jupiter, So so there's a lot of forecasty stuff, and then some simple tutorials for folks that are interested in astrology. I'm very ninth house. So I do a lot of tutorials and teaching.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. It's been loads of fun, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Kathy. I appreciate it.
All right, and everybody remember, forecasts at omtimes.com, and you'll find me at empowermentunlimited.net and on YouTube at the Professional Aquarian channel. Talk to you soon.